Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to the current economic situation in the country and, of course, in the way that the upcoming government will be able to tackle the economic challenges of the country, especially with regards to negotiations with the IMF that are, of course, very, very important, particularly in terms of the new extended fund facility that, of course, Pakistan is going to be looking at, since many firms, experts and other political leaders have emphasized how crucial it is for the progress of the country. And then, of course, also with reference to the end of the standby arrangement after the last review by April, which, of course, is also something that Pakistan needs to be on the lookout for. And, of course, particularly the finance ministry and whoever takes lead on this front, of course, will be very, very important in terms to be able to deal with not just the economic challenges at home and, of course, the kind of tough measures and decisions that the government will have to take in a situation where we already see people who are suffering from rising prices, huge inflation, and, of course, the kind of economic challenges that they face for quite some time now. And, of course, adding to what now is going to be a very crucial program with the IMF that will not only, of course, allow us to have a better package with reference to the IMF, but then also in terms of the way that other bilateral or multilateral engagements will unfold and how we're going to be seeing foreign creditors play and how exactly these relations are going to pan out for Pakistan, bringing in foreign direct investment in the country. So we're going to be taking a look at this in our first segment and understanding what sort of challenges are there for the new government. Our next one is going to be taking a look at the rising intolerance in Pakistan. Unfortunately, an incident in Lahore's Ichara Bazar is something that has shocked people to the core and has sparked much controversy in terms of what has been happening in the country, where a very, very tragic and unfortunate incident was barely averted, of course, with the help and the courage of the police and security officials who were there, particularly, of course, the ASP, Sher Banu Naqvi, who was present on the situation and handled the situation well, in which a woman was threatened by a mob, accusing her of blasphemy based on the clothes that she was wearing and, of course, a misinterpretation of what was written on them. And so this is going to be something that has opened eyes on a lot of fronts and has allowed for questions to be asked that need to be pondered within the society as a whole, and as to what exactly is it that we're looking at and dealing with, and what needs to be done in terms of this radical mindset, and especially the kind of mob mentality that then unfolds, where people who are not even aware of the situation, who have not even actually witnessed or accurately interpreted what has been going on, will act in ways that they will later regret or that they will later say they were not aware of. So we're going to be taking a look at all of this and what this means for the country, and then particularly in terms of the actions that need to be taken following such incidents and the consequences, of course. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment on the economic front, I've been joined by Mahar Rahman, who's a senior economist, and Dr. Mahmood Khalid, senior research economist at Biden. Thank you very much, gentlemen and ma'am, for joining us and being part of the discussion. I'll start with you, Mahmood Saab, with reference to what we've been seeing, particularly in terms of the previous years, the previous year or so, in which we, of course, saw the standby arrangement. It's still undergoing. And then, of course, with reference to the way that we saw the PDM tenure barely being able to secure this standby arrangement, and, of course, negotiations with the IMF and the way that the finance ministry or the finance minister were dealing with the IMF in terms of negotiations were of extreme importance to what that meant for Pakistan and how that's going to impact the economic and political challenges of the country. So in your opinion, where we stand today, of course, we have an idea of what the kind of setup that we'll have. Of course, the teams need to be far clearer in terms of who exactly will be dealing with the IMF. But in terms of the strategy that needs to be put in place, in terms of the preparation and the homework that needs to be done, that time is now, especially with the end of the standby arrangement coming soon. What are we going to need in terms of engaging with the IMF for another extended fund facility and for a program that needs to be put in place, and what factors need to be kept in mind, particularly given our performance in the previous year or so?
Well, over time, the engagement with IMF has taken a dramatic change. Earlier, there used to be a conditionality coming after our agreements with the IMF, but now we have preconditions which needs to be fulfilled in order to get some engagement with the IMF. So, to my understanding, more or less the settings are going to be the same, which were there in the standby arrangements. The idea is to improve on the fiscal risk side, along with measures to improve the balance of payment. When we talk about the fiscal risks, that means that the prescription is to reduce the circular debts as much as possible, specifically the energy sector, in which the cost of production versus the collection has huge gaps, which has over time developed a kind of a debt which itself is not manageable and sooner or later is going to hit the budget of the government, running of the governments. So they want that not to happen and it should be passed on to the consumers. So this is what the government has been strictly following as well. On the other side, the idea was to improve the revenue collection, where the mandate was to improve the working of the tax collection authority, specifically the FBR, and a roadmap was developed in terms of reforming the FBR towards a better policy and administration, which could not mature because the court has given a stay order, and the hopefully the next government is going to carry out that. And lastly speaking, what was needed in the balance of payment context, they wanted the foreign exchange markets to work independently without any intervention. And the state bank should pursue a monetary policy which is independent, focusing on the inflation only. And that is what the state bank has been doing. We have seen the policy rates going up to 22%, and the reason solely was to combat the increase in inflation, which over time has crept in the system. So, to my understanding, more or less the strategy towards the engagement with the IMF is going to remain the same, because the requirements on their part is has not changed, and the team on our sides would only be looking forward for an amount which should be close to $6 billion, because that is essentially an amount which we are going to require to service our upcoming debt repayments, as well as help us secure some confidence from the rest of the donors, which can actually help ease our pressure on the external front.
Right, Maha, with reference to what we've seen, and especially in terms of the political uncertainty that was there before the elections, and now, of course, with the change in government, of course, we've been seeing the way that different teams have led the negotiations with the IMF previously as well, and then, of course, even now, there is still uncertainty as to who exactly is going to be leading on that front. I want to know whether or not this has a huge impact on the way that this is going to unfold, particularly in terms of pre-planning that should have been there by now, and especially with reference to the way that we're going to be able to then engage based on how the standby arrangement has unfolded, and how much of continuity in that sense will be seen or will be important to the IMF.
Thank you, Sana. Thank you for having me on the show. So the first thing that I'm going to say is that the 3 billion standby arrangement was a temporary agreement that was in place. However, the caretaker government handled that well. We delivered on the promises, unlike in the past. So that should pave way for a smoother negotiation. However, since the extended fund facility is going to be a longer term facility, I think it's definitely the case that more stringent measures are going to accompany the extended fund facility. In December, the IMF board has approved additional funding for South Asian countries. So now we are looking at a package of 6 to 8 billion. And the outgoing finance minister also hinted to the possibility of increased climate financing coming into the country. So now we're looking at a bigger package. We're looking at more stringent measures that will accompany this. However, the government's roadmap right now has not been clear, because during the election campaigning, they've been hinting at more populist measures that were going to win them elections and that were going to get them the vote. So what exactly is going to be the government's way forward? also remains to be seen. And given the fact that we are now looking at a PMLN and a PPP coalition, they often have different ideologies on key issues on the table. So Mahmood Saab rightly pointed out that we would need to look at energy reforms, we would need to look at taxation reforms, not just increasing collection, but also looking at the reforms in terms of bringing people who are not in the net, in the tax net, and improving the tax administration. But when it comes to issues like privatization, especially of the distribution companies, PMLN and PPP have had different ideologies. So how will the sitting coalition navigate those different ideologies? And what is going to be the roadmap is going to determine how quickly would the extended fund facility be negotiated and signed in. However, with the last tranche coming in April, it's become urgent that we have a clear roadmap in place for the extended fund facility, and we get down to the work that's required as soon as possible.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. And Faisal, before you ask the question, I actually want to explore further what Maha has raised in terms of the PPP and the PMLN, and I want your opinion on it in terms of course, the way that we've talked about political governance, we've talked about different political parties being able to engage with other, of course, on the economic front. It's a very, very important chapter, and if there are going to be differing views, and of course the oppositions of any parliament have differing views to whoever the ruling setup is, but this is a coalition setup, then of course with differing views on economic fronts, that's going to be a challenge to be able to navigate and actually put that forward in terms of a combined stance. How much of a hindrance do you think this will be, and whether or not we will be having a team that can tackle this? It's for you.
Yeah, obviously, you know, Sana, if we look at the government and the current government, which is going to be coalition government, both of the governments, both of the political parties, they were having their agenda when it comes to how they want to tackle with the economic pressures they would be facing in coming future, and they must have been having a program itself to how to tackle with the IMF in coming days. And if they are given the extended debt facility to Pakistan, and the package is given to Pakistan by the IMF, then how they are going to cope with it. Both of the political parties, they had their own ideas about it, own agendas about it, and now when they are sitting together, of course they will be sharing their agendas with each other, and their agendas, we can always consider their agendas to be people friendly. And right now, of course, we know that people are facing problems when it comes to inflation. Inflation in last 2 years, it has actually touched the roofs, maybe blasted the roofs. And right now, if we look at the people, they want relief. They want relief in terms of a price hike in the energy sector, price hike in the obviously petrol, diesel, each and everything. They want the inflation to be reduced and controlled, and which we have been seeing that all of the inflation which we saw in last 2 years, that was mainly because of on the recommendations of IMF, because IMF wanted to give a bailout package, and then of course to help fix the economy of Pakistan. So both of the political parties now joining hands on the Constitution Avenue, sitting in the Premier office is PMLN. Of course, we know that PMLN already gave signs that they will be going for IMF program, extended program, and if that is extended to them, then of course they will be implementing their own policies. And we know that previously, I mean in last 2 years, they have been trying to do it, but somehow they couldn't control. Yes, we can say that in last 2 years we had political turmoil as well, but in the midst of the elections very recently we can predict that maybe this kind of political rift still be going on in coming future. So we can say that these kind of challenges still be around, and for both of the major parties, People's Party and PMLN, both of them, of course, they have to come out of it and at the same time come out clean out of it in front of the people, because they don't want to lose their vote banks at the same time. And to me, I think the work which was done by the interim setup, especially Dr. Shamshad, she has been brilliant when it comes to, of course, sitting with and negotiating IMF deals with the IMF itself, and she is very respectable and very accepted within the IMF negotiators. So it is a plus for her. Her policies should be followed in coming days, and at the same time we know that SIFC has played a brilliant role when it comes to attracting FDIs and attracting investments in different sectors of Pakistan, be it agriculture sector or mining sector or all other sectors. They have been attracting, and I think that is a good boost to economy itself, and at the time when we are desperately in need of investments in different sectors of Pakistan. So that is the only way forward. Whoever wants to obviously take the big office and wants to fix the economy, they have to keep in mind that SIFC needs to be successful, and the policies which were introduced and which were being followed by Dr. Shamshad, they need to be carried on the way they were, at least for a year, let's say, and after that, if they have their own agendas, them should be implemented after that.
Right, and Farooq, I wanted to understand whether or not this is a direction that it is a possibility, or whether or not this is something that is a given, especially in terms of policies that are required by the IMF. I want to know whether or not when we talk about different teams looking at decision making and the challenges we face at home and of course IMF conditions, is there more than one way to deal with the situation and more than one approach to look at it, or is what Faisal is saying in terms of what has happened or led by the caretaker setup is a very obvious choice for whoever comes next?
Right, Sana, thank you very much. First of all, I think Faisal took a long route, but then he reached where he wanted to, although he did not connect the points. Regarding People's Party and PMLN's disagreement, honestly, one thing that really mystifies me is People's Party's position on privatization. We know that it is left of the center party, and PMLN is right of the center, so their approach is socialist or proto-socialist versus proto-capitalist, right? One believes in divestment, if not privatization directly. The other one has actually spoken repeatedly about keeping the public assets, SOEs for that matter, and reforming them. But why am I mystified? Because immediately after PDM government was formed, if you remember, there was a presser that was chaired by former President Asif Ali Zardari, in which I remember his solution to economic malaise. And he clearly spoke about, divesting SOEs. So I don't know why they have taken this new position in the run up to the elections, because that seems to actually create more problems. Because in the end, you have to realize that the government has no business in running businesses. And in the end, what happens is that political parties end up using these SOEs as a dumping ground for people that they want to actually placate or make happy. But Faisal, as I pointed out, reached where he wanted to in the end, and that was SIFC. I think that whatever state has as its persuasive or coercive force, that actually works when it comes to bringing together these disparate forces. Particularly, if you remember that when General Bajwa was army chief, and at that time most of the political parties were opposed to the idea of his extension, but then we saw that all of them getting together and voting, writing law to enable his extension. If you keep that in mind, SIFC has a military component as well, and that is going to actually have an impact too, hopefully so. But let me also remind you, Miftah Ismail's recent testimony regarding who got the IMF deal and who actually ensured SBA as well, and that was former and upcoming Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So I think that what Faisal is attributing to caretaker setup, I think it was laid down by the Prime Minister. who is going to become Prime Minister, right? In coming days, things are going to improve in that context regarding the kind of chaos we saw on the economic front during PDM's time, and we saw during PTI's time also. That was based not on the choice to go to IMF, but that was because a lot of precious time was wasted because of populism. PTI actually threw away 9 months in deciding whether to go to IMF or not. At that time, your reserves were hemorrhaging, right? Similarly, PMLN and PDM also did similar thing when Miftah Ismail was removed. And after that, Ishaq Dar Sahab came, and he actually came with the pride that he is some sort of IMF whisperer. But what happened then? He could not persuade them. It was the Prime Minister who had to save the program on the last day of the program, right? So, in any case, what you need to do, what we need to do, is ensure that our interaction with the fund is perfect, and we keep on following their suggestions. But that doesn't mean we cannot haggle. There are two concerns that I have. On one side, all this talk of energy reform and circular debt ensures that inflation doesn't come down, because you keep on raising the prices of electricity and gas also. And then because inflation is high, you keep the policy rate high as well. If policy rate remains at 22%, what happens? You don't want to spend money in the market. And because of that, job creation does not take place. That means poor becomes poorer and jobs are not there. So you'll have to find a way to convince the fund also to actually find additional resources to ensure that you can reform these things too, without creating that kind of burden on the common man on the street. Without bringing down the policy rates, we cannot revive the economy.
Yeah.
But before asking another question, I just want to follow up with Farooq. Can we expect that policy rate to come down while we negotiate with the IMF?
Usually what happens is that when your inflation is at a given rate, right, your core inflation, at that time policy rate cannot be actually brought down.
Yeah.
And this is what we are seeing, almost parallel to the core inflation. But you'll have to find a way to ensure either through FDI or some other sources that you have enough cash to ensure that you don't have the same kind of vicious cycle where you are caught. And because of that, you cannot actually create the kind of economic opportunities for the common journeys that is needed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Sana,
Yes, sir.
with your permission, I wanted to go towards Dr. Mahmood, and I have a question, and of course this is something I want to learn myself from him, and of course viewers can learn as well. If we go through the recommendations of Moody and Fitch, of course they keep on recommending Pakistan to go for a larger IMF package. Just wanted to know, what is larger IMF package and how does it work? What kind of implications we can be facing if we, of course, go towards that, and whether we are able to go towards that?
And Dr. Mahmood, because there's a lot of talk about reprofiling our debt as well, I was hoping that you could also shed light on its modalities.
Well, I'll take the second question first. Well, debt reprofiling is something which Pakistan would right away go for, but the problem is that it's a debtor-creditor relationship. Debts are only reprofiled if the creditors are also willing to extend our commitment in terms of time, and definitely they're going to charge something more for it as well. But there are options available in which reprofiling generally happens when you are switching from one creditor to the other. And this is what Pakistan can actually move forward for. For example, we have an option of going to the capital markets where we can issue Sukuk bonds, but that is only possible if we have enough credibility as a sovereign debtor that our future repayments would be there, and the economic path is something which is looking promising. Having said that, coming back to the first question, in which a kind of a program which essentially covers not just our short-term needs but are also a long-term program in the nature where some cushion towards restructuring can also take place. Remember, because when we go towards the IMF in terms of short-term financing, since the measures needs to be taken up within a short span of time, so the urgency of reforms is also there. And at times while doing so, the essential elements in the reforms are missed and only the outcomes are focused. For example, when we talk about throwing onto the consumers the energy prices, which what we essentially miss from the discussion is that from day one, what went wrong? Was it the distribution companies which were supposed to be privatized along with major changes in the way energy is produced or improving the distribution infrastructure? That didn't happen. And similarly, on the other side, such as reforms on the fiscal pensions, we had to move towards something which is more sustainable, such as the defined contribution system. So if we don't have an extended program which runs in terms of more resources as well as in time, we cannot opt for reforms which needs more time. But the problem with our IMF engagement has been that only two of the engagements have actually matured in terms of the engagement. Out of the 23 programs, we didn't go long. Rather, we actually, on our own will, cut short the engagements. So maybe the underlying message from the International Rating Agency this time is that please make a commitment which you are going to ensure go till the end. So if you are going to go into an extended fund facility, the long-term engagement theoretically would first mean that at least to fulfill the time which is underlying the extended fund facility. It should not happen that once this things start improving, we suddenly start saying that, sorry, we don't need the IMF anymore. So maybe their recommendation is that whatever you are trying to commit this time, let it mature over the long run and all the commitments need to be taken up. So by either having a bitter pill towards our consumers or the overall economy in terms of higher inflation, but maybe this is the time that we need to actually commit to what we are suggesting as a reform towards IMF as well.
Right, Maha, of course, in terms of the policy rate and inflation, there's of course also very closely linked to the foreign direct investment, and we have seen the role of the SFC has played in this regard, and its formation, of course, in essence was structured towards this goal. But how far do you think we've achieved on that front, and what challenges still lie ahead in terms of making sure that we are able to gather more on that front, and then of course impact inflation and policy rates within the country, attract businessmen to invest in the country, and also in terms of our bilateral and multilateral engagements, many of whom are looking at the way that we're going to be negotiating with the IMF further before they're actually thinking of coming in the country. What more can be done on that front?
First of all, I would like to bring attention to a point that's missing from this conversation so far, and that's the choice of the finance minister. And that's a choice that PMLN has disappointed the masses on in the past tenures that it has, in the past tenures and whenever it has come to power. So the first thing that the government needs to keep front and center, that competence needs to take precedence over your family connections. And that is going to be key in setting the agenda vis-a-vis IMF, vis-a-vis your investment climate in the country, and vis-a-vis increasing your export productivity. And when I'm talking about setting the right agenda, I think it's been rightly pointed out that Dr. Shamshad performed very well. We have a new female chief minister in power in Punjab. And so that together with all the other important agenda items on the agenda that need to be addressed is also the question of female labor force participation in the country. And so when you're forming the government, how do you form a government that's more equitable and that can cater to the concerns of the masses? And when it comes to setting the main agenda, and when you're talking about SIFC, I would disagree with the opinion in the room that SFC that we actually needed that. We don't need to create parallel institutions when our existing institutions do not work. We need to incentivize investment by creating the right incentives within the public sector and the private sector. That is going to organically bring in investment rather than creating an institution that's not autonomous, that's run by stick, and that's giving into whatever perpetuates the status quo in the country is a mistake that we keep repeating in every policy decision that we take. So no, we do not need SIFC in the room. We need to create the right incentives to promote investment. We need to increase our export productivity. We need to reform the sectors to not only increase the tax revenue and increase the productivity, but also increase the quality along all these dimensions. And the last point that has not been discussed so far is that there will be a 1 to 4% increase in the temperatures. And with Pakistan situated in a way that is home to more than 8,000 glaciers, floods wreaked havoc and caused us a loss of 30 billion in 2022. So climate resilience needs to be front and center, together with whenever we are looking at productivity, reforming the tax sector, reforming the energy sector, and along with what is going to be the continuation or the expansion of the safety net program in Pakistan. How are we going to expand on it to also cater for climate disasters and other contingencies whenever we come across them? So there's a lot that the new government has to tackle, but the first and the foremost thing it needs to do is select the right people so that they can organically take the right decisions while they are in power.
Right, and that is true. Let me actually go back to what you were saying earlier regarding energy sector reform. One thing that actually keeps on, hogging a lot of attention is circular debt. And people actually, in the past, we have attributed a lot of it to miscalculation in the past, the capacity charges that were agreed upon, particularly regarding IPPs. But then there comes a question regarding the gas sector, which does not have the equivalent of IPPs. So there too, we have this humongous circular debt. Why is it that that is happening? And capacity charges, why is it that every government keeps on saying that they are renegotiating it, but even then we end up with the same malaise? Mahasaiba.
So because we don't tackle the problem at its core, we keep tackling the symptoms of the problem and we don't tackle the core issue. कि असल में मसला क्या है? Why is it that our circular debt keeps increasing? What is actually contributing to that circular debt? And so we keep tackling whatever is the symptom of the problem or whatever is top of mind for us at that particular point. And we do not tackle the root causes. So for each of these policies, we need to go back and tackle the several root causes that are contributing to an ever-increasing circular debt, whether that's in the face of bad policy issues in the past, the current policy issues. We do not need IMF to come and prescribe an agenda for us. The agenda that IMF usually prescribes is usually something that we need to do.
Could you qualify this through examples?
Yeah, so for example, let me take the example of something that we really need to do is to reform our education sector. So in the education sector, a lot of the times, one of the key policies that has failed is the policy of teacher rationalization and recruitment. That wherever we post teachers, they do not go and serve in those areas, and they all want to serve in the main bigger cities in all the provinces. And every time that policy fails, we bring in the IMF, we bring in the World Bank, and we bring in other multilateral institutions to come and diagnose the root cause. And whatever prescription or formula they come up in terms of, okay, this is the formula you need to follow to recruit or post teachers. That again fails because that's not addressing the grassroots reality. The grassroots reality is that the clerk that sits in the DCO's office is photocopying last year's lists and then sending it out this year without regards to whatever the new formula is, how it needs to be followed. And when you go into the field and ask them that, oh, the policy changed, the formula changed, why was it not implemented? And the response to that is, we did not understand whatever communication came our way. So sometimes the root cause to your policy issues is as simple as how do we fix the implementation? How do we fix whatever is the actual cause to that issue? And a lot of macro issues will, for a lot of macro issues, you will again need to go back to the microeconomics as to what is it that's actually contributing to the problem at hand. And if you go back and look at the policy design, in a lot of cases, our policies are well designed. They fail because they're not well implemented. So
Right,
we also need to
absolutely.
work on implementation. We need to work
Absolutely.
on.
Thank you very much, Maha, for joining us and being part of the discussion. And thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood, for being part of the discussion as well. And of course, talking to us at length about the economic challenges that the country faces. And this, of course, is a discussion that is ongoing. And of course, a lot of that remains to be seen as to how the new government is going to be tackling these challenges. In our show, we're also going to be taking a look at what has recently happened in Pakistan, particularly in terms of the way that the extremist or radical thought has seeped into the society and how people have been reacting. And one such incident, of course, very recently happened, which is evident of this fact, is in the way that an accusation of blasphemy was put on a woman who was wearing an attire which was misinterpreted to be able to depict verses of the Quran which was not true, but because it was interpreted in that way, it resulted in a mob that gathered around her and of course threatened to kill her. And this was something that was handled then by security forces, and we're very glad that the security forces and of course the ASP, Ms. Bano, who made a lot of effort in this regard, and through her bravery and courage and her quick action is why the life of this individual, this woman, was saved. But unfortunately, this also brings to question a lot of other questions and what we need to do about such incidents, why they happen in the first place, and what can be done to prevent them in the future. So Faisal, I'll take your viewpoint first in terms of course, how this event has unfolded. What really then is the core question that comes to your mind that needs to be addressed?
Utter madness needs to be addressed with an iron fist, I must say, because if we obviously, keenly look at this particular issue, what has happened is the lady who was actually wearing this attire, of course, it had a font, Arabic font, which is mainly used in Quran Pak as well. I mean, Quranic verses are written in that.
But I mean, it's a language.
Yeah, it's just a language, Arabic language, and the font which was actually used, and the word which was written on it, the word was halwa, and the halwa means beauty, halwa means sweet, and this is what the actual meaning of that word are. But of course, it is utter madness which was portrayed that day in that market. What it was perceived as that of course she is somehow wearing the Quranic verses, because the font was that. Nobody knew what it means and what it actually represents. The attire, it's very famous in Middle Eastern countries, and she was wearing, obviously copying a style from the Middle East, and she was wearing in Pakistan. But of course, people of Pakistan did not digest it. They did not know that it is a style, it's just Arabic language. Anything is written in there. Of course, they don't know what it means, but all they know is that it is quite similar to that font in which, of course, Quran Pak is written.
Yeah.
Kudos to, of course, ASP Bano. She played excellent role. She knew that she has to calm everyone up, and she said nobody needs to take law in their hands, and she would deal with it, and she actually very safely took her with herself, and she saved her. And I think Punjab police must recommend her, and they have already done, for the Qaeda-ism medal. And I think that's how the police officers should be reacting to these kind of madnesses. And
Right.
for the future, all we can say is that on a larger scale, we need to make people aware of certain things which are misperceived by people at large. And unless we do that, of course, we would keep on seeing this kind of madness on our roads.
Right, and she of course also talked about the mob mentality, and I can understand how situation is different once the mob gathers, but the question is why the mob gathered in the first place. And Farooq, we also saw that unfortunately the woman had to apologize after that, even though there was a misinterpretation that took place. And there are so many brands out there all over the world who have text on the clothes, and a lot of that has put this again another aspect into question of women thinking about what they're going to wear and as a threat to their life before stepping out of their homes. And this of course poses a security situation, an added risk to the so many others that women already face on the ground. So while we of course see the woman apologizing and clarifying that she did not mean to disrespect or hurt anyone, who's really at fault here?
Right, Sana. First of all, I just wanted to qualify that while Pakistan has many gender-related issues, this one per se, was not rooted essentially in the victim being the a woman. Why am I saying this? A man, if he was also wearing such a shirt, it could have created similar kind of confusion. Because people are people, and I'm going to actually qualify that as well. But if that would have happened, I mean, I can tell you, a woman or man, this time this victim was lucky that they survived. Next time, whosoever is going to be victim, they might not be that lucky. And for that, we have to zoom out and actually look at the bigger picture. What I keep on talking about is that there is this humongous giant that is sleeping, that is, a religious sensibility in this country. It is a country of 96%, 97% Muslims. And when, because it is actually a product of religious malnutrition and gross abuse of religion for political purposes in the past also, this giant, when it wakes up, whosoever is accused of this, any kind of wrongdoing in religious parlance, they somehow become a hapless, bunch of mess. And they have to apologize no matter what. That's why every time there is any use or abuse of religion, I request everybody not to use it because you don't know the consequences. Let me now connect this episode with something that recently happened, right? This sensibility is like a sword. When it is drawn, then it has to draw blood, right? Example is there. Recently, there was a social media campaign against the Chief Justice, right? And just see the power of the sentiment, even though it was rooted in misunderstanding and misinterpretation of what was said in the court, that court had to actually explain its position, right? And because you have actually drummed up that sentiment, somebody somewhere who is not that educated, the many people who were, the members of this mob were asked whether they knew what Quran said, and they did not know because they had not read it. But they were there to kill this woman, right? So my humble summation is that what happened then and what happened now were connected. Once you actually drum up this sentiment, once you actually, pander to it, then they actually feel at liberty to kill. And you'll have to stop doing that. If you don't do it, this country does not do it. I mean, next to you is India, and you have the example. Next to you is Afghanistan. You have the example. What kind of havoc can be wreaked by this kind of sentiments? Well, let us not go there. And please keep on asking everybody not to stir this sentiment.
Absolutely, and I think that's very valid in terms of the connection that you drew, because this is really where the core issue stands. Thank you, Farooq. Thank you, Faisal, for joining us as always. And we hope to be able to talk about this in a better way. And we hope that the people like Ms. Chair Bano and, of course, others who took control of the situation are ever present in our security forces, and they're able to take charge of the situation and protect the citizens of the country. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.